Hi. Sorry about this. My voice, today is Tuesday, February 11th, and my voice is already starting to go. So I decided to go ahead and record these lectures just in case my voice is totally gone for tomorrow. You'll be watching these instead of taking class notes. Some housekeeping really quickly. A1 grades will be released later today, Wednesday, February 12th. You'll be able to view those through your gradebook. Please be sure to read the rubric and the feedback provided to you on that assignment. Today's content, we're going to talk about the model of the mind, finish our boxes with our arrows, and then we're also going to discuss some suggestions for use, and we may or may not introduce some learning principles depending upon how far we get. So we left off, we were talking about attention, and I just posted a new video on our Blackboard course site under Units, Unit 2. If you go inside, down at the very bottom, you'll see a TED Talk link to another sort of discussion starter on attention, which I think is really awesome. We talked about how attention was really important in order for us to move sensory information along our model of the mind, but let's talk about some of the roles of attention. One of them is selective attention. This gives us the purpose of focus. This is what allows us to tune out the things that are happening around us and focus just on what is happening excuse me, and just what is happening in front of us or whatever is happening in our priority sensory sphere. We also have divided attention, which we talked about on Monday, also known as multitasking. Divided attention means that we're not completely dedicated to any one thing at any one time. I would argue that if we could just be present moment to moment, we wouldn't actually have divided attention. If we could be 100% where we were in every moment, we wouldn't be divided. And then sustained attention, and this is one of the issues that I noticed when we moved from a 50-minute class to a 75-minute class, is vigilance. Really difficult to maintain a certain level of attention when people are talking. You know, you try to break it up with videos and dialogue and diagrams and things like that. But sustained attention, we definitely reach a threshold. The sustained attention expectation is 60 minutes. By the time you are in 7th grade, you should be able to pay attention for 60 minutes. And I would say that all of these are valid roles of attention. Selecting what we focus on, also being able to multitask, switch between topics that we're working on, and then sustained attention. If we have difficulty with any one of these, like we see with attention deficit disorder, selective attention is going to be affected, divided attention is going to be affected, and of course sustained attention is going to be affected. There are many different things that we can do. If you'll recall, one of the ways that we keep our attention in our class is we do fun stuff. We make silly noises as a class. We tell jokes, a variety of rapport with students that enables and empowers the class to move along and help you guys maintain that attention. Well, we've worked on our attention arrow, so we've gone from sensory input to sensory memory to attention, and now we're looking at working/short-term memory. Now, working/short-term memory are actually two different kinds of memory. Working memory is when we're actually working with content, and then short-term memory is sort of what's happening on the way in. We call it working memory once we pull it out of long-term memory stores, but for the purposes of this class, I'm really going to focus on speaking of this placeholder as being interchangeable working or short-term memory. Now, short-term memory, its function is to hold conscious processing. It's meant to be active, purposeful. The capacity is 7 plus or minus 2. This is also what we refer to as the memory span. And both of those items are really important in understanding how working/short-term memory works. The duration is pretty short. If we're not working actively with information, we're going to lose it. So we have about 30 seconds. That's what that little mark means, is the tilde. Excuse me. This is the reason why I'm making the video as opposed to having class. Hopefully I'll be right as rain tomorrow, though, and you won't ever have to listen to this video. But if you are, note to self, you can hit pause at any point in time and just sort of put yourself in a holding pattern to allow yourself to take some of these notes as we move through. Now, maintenance and rehearsal. comes in many different forms. We have mental or verbal repetition. Mental repetition would be just sort of keeping it in between your ears and your brain and sort of repeating it over and over again. And then verbal repetition would be saying it out loud. Sensory input, sensory memory, attention, short-term working memory. Sensory input, sensory memory, attention, short-term working memory. Both of those are forms of maintenance and rehearsal. This allows us to keep that information and hold on to it longer than that 30 seconds. Now, maintenance and rehearsal, again, it's an active space, and this is where our book differentiates a little bit and calls this working memory, because we are actually working with that information. But remember, because of memory span, the capacity of 7 plus or minus 2, what we're holding in there might be really, really limited. I'm going to try to post some exercises online for short-term working memory just for you guys to check it out. There's a few that I like to play just for fun, but I'm a nerd, so who knows. In order for us to get information from working or short-term memory, we have to encode that information into the long-term memory store. The long-term memory store, its function is to organize and hold on to information. The capacity is, as of yet, unlimited. We do not know yet if there's an upper limit on what you can store and how long you can store it. And again, duration, is it permanent? We just don't know. We have some people who have the capacity to remember things from a very long time ago. Now, we're going to speak really quickly about encoding, that little arrow that moves information from the working/short term and into long term. We have automatic processing, and this is what's happening around us when we're not consciously intaking information and working on rehearsal or maintenance or anything else like that. Automatic processing is something that helps to keep us safe. Effortful processing, on the other hand, involves rehearsal. Might also involve the serial position effect, where the information is when we learned it. I know that when my cell phone company started to advance a little bit, when I would call to make any changes to my cell phone service, they would always say, give us the last 4 digits of your social security number. And I'd always have to run through the whole thing in my head in order for me to get those last 4 digits. And that's an example of the serial position effect. How we encode automatically and effortfully, but what we encode is the meaning. And the meaning generally is semantic or visual. And if you'll remember, the sensory memories that we encode generally tend to be iconic or echoic. So it would make sense that when we encode something, we're going to encode it based upon visual or acoustic value or meanings. Now, if an individual is sensory impaired and let's say has a visual disability or is impaired through their hearing, their brain actually works to compensate for that. So what would normally have been dedicated to visual processing actually gets reallocated. Those resources get redistributed. It's actually a very brilliant and wonderful system. Now, the older you are when that vision or hearing becomes impaired, the less malleable the brain is. So those areas don't change as much as we age. But what we encode is the meaning of information, how valuable it is, what does it do for us, how is it going to affect us. We also encode the information's organization. We might actually chunk the information into parts. When we talk about phone numbers, we've got 3 digits for our area code, 3 digits for the prefix, and then 3 digits or 4 digits for the final 4. That's a form of chunking. Social security numbers, we also do 3, 2, 4 as far as organizing. Those help us to encode information and how it relates to. And then hierarchies, the best example I can think of is when we look at the branches of government and how that works. We could also look at formulations of companies with a CFO or a CEO and vice presidents of different areas, how that branches off. Another very prototypical example is your table of contents in your textbook. All of those are ways in which we organize information and show the relationship between concepts. Now, when we encode, we want to elaborate, and elaboration can enhance memory. Elaboration does enhance memory. The more we elaborate, the more we connect to the information that we're putting in. One way that we can extensively process information is to do vivid examples. One of the things that I really try to do in our lecture experience is I try to create an environment that is dynamic, which means constantly moving, but then also really sort of challenging and engaging. It stretches your mind in the way that you think about content. I provide funny examples. I provide very personal examples. The intent is to sort of help you manifest an emotional experience with the content that we're going through. That way you can encode that information extensively. Another thing that I do, in addition to being dynamic and trying to be funny, is self-reference. When I tell stories about me and my family, I am modeling for you a process that I hope that you employ, where you really start to connect your own personal experience with the content that we're discussing. Now, after we encode, everything goes into the long-term memory store. As I mentioned before, its intention is to organize and store information. The capacity is unlimited, and we're pretty sure that the duration is permanent. Having that set up before we encode kind of gives us a good idea of how information works. Now, the analogy that I like to use for long-term memory stores is a big warehouse of filing cabinets. Now, from the first day of class, you started a BSU Psych 101 Professor Henderson filing cabinet. And believe it or not, you probably still just have one drawer, maybe two drawers. Maybe each drawer represents a unit. But within each one of those units comes smaller folders, and within those folders will be even smaller bits of pieces of paper. And within those pieces of paper, there's going to be content written and organized on that. So keeping that analogy in mind, that's how we store long-term memory. Now, we no longer use these in our society, but there used to be this thing called a card catalog. And what it did is it would log information, and it would log it by a whole variety of different ways. Now, when I think about it today, it's a lot like a Google search. If you were to type into just a few words, it would take those words and would make all sorts of combinations. Well, that's what happens in long-term memory. Whenever we encode information, we can encode it with a variety of different catchphrases or key terms. In order to get that information out, or in order to find the right filing cabinet, we have to work on a process of retrieval. That's our final arrow that comes back into the short-term / working memory environment. Now, retrieval is a very dynamic process. We have retrieval cues. In the academic environment, we use what we call recall, where you might be given a question like, name 5 old white dudes and discuss their contributions to modern day clinical psychology. Okay, that would be an essay question. I've given you 5 old white dudes, modern day clinical psychology. You have to manifest everything else. So you're going to have to open up your filing cabinet that says modern day clinical psychology, and then you're going to have to maybe even open up your folder that says old white dudes. Excuse me, so you can sort of construct an understanding of how those old white dudes contribute to modern day clinical psychology. What we do primarily in this class for ease of function is multiple choice. I need you to recognize something. When I give you a multiple choice and I ask you to complete a statement or answer a question, and I give you 4 options to choose from, you need to recognize which is the correct answer. You don't need to recall anything, you just need to be able to recognize which is the correct answer. But if any of you are like me, I have a very unique capacity for making every single one of those 4 options viable. And I used to get into quite a bit of trouble with multiple choice test taking. So what I ended up doing is I actually ended up covering up the 4 possible answers and just treating it like it was a short answer. I would just fill in the blank or answer the statement, or pardon me, the question. And I found my accuracy on those assessments increased dramatically because I would get so distracted by those other options. So if you're a little bit like me and have that unique, wonderful gift to make everything work, then you might want to think a little bit about decreasing some of those distractors that we have. Relearning, wonderful way. We really grease our filing cabinets when we relearn information. Taking Psych 101 for a second time. The information, while not new, you're not constructing a filing cabinet or making the folders for the first time. You might be embellishing the information inside those folders, and you might be strengthening the filing cabinet and your ability to locate the information in there. One of my favorites is priming cues or clues. One of the ways that we use priming in this class is on your assessments, your unit quizzes, and your midterm and your final. We set you up by saying, as discussed in lecture, because I want you to know which filing cabinet to open. So I provide you with a cue or a clue on where to look for the answer to that question. And then we are also primed throughout the question with the different contents of the question. Now, with retrieval, we have context effects. And by context effects, I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but when you're in a specific environment, you can remember situations and circumstances that happened before in that specific environment. For example, teaching in the same classrooms repeatedly, I end up developing quite a few memories of that environment and where certain groups of students used to sit and the various experiences that I had with those. When I'm back in those environments, I'm able to remember and retrieve that information for those previous experiences exponentially easier. Now, we also have what we call mood congruent memories. When we retrieve information, some of you might have noticed that when you get upset, you're more likely to remember things that have upset you in the past. Well, that's a mood congruent memory, or your ability to access memories that are congruent with your current mood. We also have state-dependent memories. State-dependent memories have to do with your level of alertness, consciousness, intoxication, caffeinated, satiated, tired. All of those things dramatically influence some of the ways that we remember things. Research is really strong that depending upon what state you are when you learn information, influences the ease with which you're able to recall that information when you're back in that state. So the old story goes, or the research study cited, is that they got students drunk. They had the students reach a certain level of intoxication, had them work on learning a series of letters or words, pardon me, and then a few days later had the students come back and had them try to recall that series of words, and the students were unable to do it. So they got the participants intoxicated again to about the same level that they were when they learned the information, and their recall dramatically improved. I'm not advocating for any sort of inappropriate or illegal activities or substance use before assessments, but it's a good thing to think about because your level of alertness, think about when you learn this information in class. If you were to take your test at about the same time, you're going to be better able to retrieve information if you are taking your test at the same time. It's a very fascinating thing about our level of alertness and memory. Now, I have a participation for you, and this one ended up being very easy. Hopefully everybody who will be working on this will get an absolute 100%, since you can pause this slide and look at it for as long as you want. I'm going to show you a form of the model of the mind, but where the terminology used to be, I've actually replaced with a random assortment of letters. And what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to go online on Wednesday after 2:30 p.m. and you can complete a matching assessment for the model of mind, matching up the letter with the terminology that fits with the model of the mind. Go ahead and pause this slide if you want to write down those letters and fill in those blanks for yourself. Now, memory doesn't always work fantastic. We have this issue of various kinds of amnesia. One of them is source amnesia, where people forget where they'd heard something. Gossips do this quite a bit. They forget where they learned about something. Professors do this quite a bit too, because I know frequently I can't remember what study did it. I know it wasn't my study, but I'll forget the origin of that study. They mainly refer to source amnesia when people try to quote somebody else without actually acknowledging that somebody else said it, really believing that for themselves they had created that concept. Now, we also have the misinformation effect. This is where in our reconstruction, in order for us to hold information into short-term working memory, we don't do a very good job of that. We actually end up having misinformation. False memories, this was a really hot topic in the 80s and 90s, where people were being hypnotized and going into therapy, and they were having all this retrieval of memories where they were horribly abused and taken advantage of. And we know now that the suggestibility, and especially hypnotic states, or even in vulnerable emotional states, the suggestibility is such that you're able to actually plant memories, false memories, and have people really believe them with great conviction. The last thing I want to touch on before we're done is maybe some things that you can do to actually improve your test grades. One thing that we know from research is that if you study repeatedly, you can boost your long-term recall. So if you practice opening those filing cabinets and pulling out those folders, you'll become better able to do that when the assessment time comes. Spend more time rehearsing or actively thinking about the material. Reading information for the first time is not enough unless you have a photographic memory or a unique ability to process information at that level. But definitely actively thinking about content uses information in another way. Make material personally meaningful. That's that self-referencing piece. How can you connect to the content so you can remember that information for an assessment? Use mnemonic devices. We're going to use one towards the end of the semester when we talk about personality. We'll use the word ocean for our 5 personality factors. We use mnemonic devices throughout sciences, especially when we try to organize a lot of information. Refresh your memories by activating cues. Test yourself. Get reading checks from a friend and just get their questions, and then just see how you do about recalling the content on those assessments. If you practice getting that information out or recalling that information out from long-term memory, you're going to become more comfortable and better able to do it when it comes time for an assessment. Minimize interference. Minimize those distractions. Remember, attention is really important. We don't want to have divided attention. We want to stay focused when we're taking an assessment. That allows us the greatest or the least amount of error when recalling information, so we don't become distracted. And then, similar to refreshing your memory by activating cues, actually test yourself. Do more than just flashcards and things like that. Test yourself. Try to answer questions